Hello and welcome to the Alphabet Mafia podcast. I'm here with Representative Taylor Small. Taylor, how are you doing?
I am doing well, given everything that's going on in our world, and grateful to be here with you.
Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate you coming on. I know you had a tremendous win this past November, and I just want to congratulate you on that.
Thank you so much. Yes, I was not expecting all of this attention, but it's slowly sinking in as to how momentous this win really was.
Yeah, sure. And for the audience, what exactly is your position?
So I am a state representative in the Vermont House, and have become the first out transgender legislator here in the state of Vermont and the 5th in the nation.
Woo! Well, that's an awesome feat.
It is indeed, especially campaigning through a global pandemic. Really trying something new this year.
Yeah, I could imagine. So you're a state representative in Vermont. How did you get interested in politics, and how did that start for you?
That is such a great question. And honestly, coming into this, I wasn't necessarily planning on running for office. I mean, the narrative that we're given is that the folks who serve in both our state and federal delegations are typically older, white men who have a substantial wealth to be able to move into those positions. And so as a young queer and trans woman, I didn't necessarily see myself as having a seat at the table. I saw myself working within community and doing grassroots activism if I wanted to see the change that we need both in our state and nation. And it was actually a call from Representative Diana Gonzalez, who was the first out queer woman of color in our state legislature and has served Winooski for the past 6 years. And during this pandemic, she let me know that she was stepping down and asked if I wanted to run for that position. And I at first said I'm unsure, and then was given 24 hours to decide.
Oh my gosh.
A testament to my personality that within 24 hours, I decided to run. And then within 48 hours after that, got a full campaign together and just hit the ground running.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Having 24 hours to decide, and then within just hours, just days, you're already going for it. Did you find support from your friends and family when you decided to go through that process?
Oh, absolutely. My family was so supportive, and of course were the first few calls that I made in deciding to run. And it was really the people of Winooski who had my back throughout the election and really were excited for new, young, and diverse representation.
That's amazing. And as a trans person, if you could just briefly describe kind of your coming out process or your transition experience, because I know we'll get into that in a little bit later as being the intersectionality between being a political figure and being a trans person. So what did that process and that decision look like for you?
Such a great question. And it actually started in high school when I first came out as gay. It was during my senior year. Feels like an easier transition at that point because you're moving from one place to another. Mm-hmm. And so following that same trend, when I was in college, I started to think about my gender identity and really think about the complexity of my identities overall. I mean, I minored in sexuality and gender identity studies, which allowed for both digging into academia while also having those introspective moments. And it came during my senior year at UVM when I decided to come out and let other folks know that I was a trans woman. And it was not easy at first. I mean, to be expected, we have a culture that is very cis focused and is really ingrained within the gender binary. So messing with structures such as that really put people on edge. And so I dealt with my fair share of harassment, whether that was out in public and on the streets, or whether that was workplace discrimination, because we put such a high threshold, especially for trans women, and what femininity looks like and how you are able to embody femininity or be respected within your femininity. And so it was a hard journey at first in really understanding the gift that is transness and being able to be liberated from this gendered system that just tries to box you in and give you a narrative of who you are supposed to be, rather than being able to truly understand your own potential in the mix. And so it was community at the end of the day that helped me to survive and to get through it and to really support me in being able to move into such leadership positions like this.
Yeah, sure. And what, in your experience, who was that community for you? Was it your friends, or did you find groups that were LGBT friendly and things like that, or what? Where did you find that comfort?
You know, as queer people, we have our chosen family, and not to say that my family rejected me by any means, but there is a strong learning curve that needed to happen and is still happening. And so at the end of the day, we have our queer siblings who are there to have our back and to understand. And more than anything, just recognize that your identity is one piece of who you are and not just succumbing to a singular narrative of who you're supposed to be. And so I, of course, had chosen family that I was able to lean on. But it was really in this time of what I call fun employment, but it was facing workplace discrimination, and then finding myself in a place where I needed to be respected in my position and my jobs. And so I left thinking that it would be easier to find another job after that. And for 6 months, I found myself without a job and having to lean more on my chosen family to be able to support me financially and moving forward. And so it was actually the Pride Center of Vermont that brought me in. I started volunteering with them and eventually took me on as a part-time employee. A year later, I moved into a full-time position. And then just 6 months after that, was able to move in to my current role as director of the Health and Wellness Program.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. And that, I love what you said about the chosen family, because that's just something that I think is fairly universal for almost all queer folk, is that your family or your friends might reject you, or they might not get it because there is a learning curve, but you find those people that have been through it. You find those people that are experiencing the same things that you experience, and really they do become your family. I just spent Christmas this past year with a bunch of friends. It wasn't even with my family. It was my first Christmas away from my family. Nothing overly homophobic happened, but I just realized over time that these people get it a little bit more than I feel more comfortable with my friends that I've chosen in my than my family. So I really like what you said about the chosen family. That's very universal, I think, for a lot of us.
And the love feels unconditional, which I think is the piece that is really embracing. And the hope that we have for all families is that the love is unconditional, and that being able to expose and be vulnerable with those closest to us is a gift that we are offering. And sometimes it's a difficult gift for folks to accept. And that's why we have our community at the end of the day, because they understand just how much of a blessing it is.
100%. And so facing workplace discrimination, I mean, you've been through it. You've had to go through instances with colleagues and coworkers that were harassing you, and then you jump into politics and you're in the public eye, and you're campaigning, and you're giving speeches, and you're going out and knocking on doors. And so, as a trans person, did you experience that on the campaign trail, homophobia or transphobia?
I did not actually face any prejudice in regards to my identity, which, is both shocking and exciting. And one testament or reason why I think it is because of the advice that I received from Representative Danica Roem, and saying that when we are running our campaigns, it is not about us. We can't separate our identity from politics. Of course, that is going to come up. And of course, it is important because we are making history. These are landmarks that need to be honored and recognized, because there is a history of us being medicalized or being institutionalized for our identities. And now we are gaining access to the decision-making tables to make sure that this does not happen again in the future. And so, though we can't separate ourselves from our identities, we can talk about the issues and the issues that are impacting our constituents most directly. And I think it is that approach that really makes folks understand the multitude of who we are. So they don't just see me as a trans person, they see me as a neighbor first. They see me as a resource in the community. And then my identities come after that, and understanding the complex lenses that I'm able to bring in creating new legislation or updating legislation that is already in place.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I'll be honest, I was a little surprised, just like you were, when you said that you didn't really face harassment, because I mean, Vermont must be a great place then, because I don't know if it would go the same way in, like, say, Alabama, but that I'm very happy for you in that sense.
I mean, I am also lucky for trailblazers like Christine Hallquist, who ran for governor just 2 years ago here in the state of Vermont. She sadly did not win that position as governor, but really pushed the narrative and understanding that transness is just one piece of who we are. And yes, we will continue to talk about it. But when she was on the campaign trail, she pushed for broadband for all and access to internet, and knowing that that is such an important issue in our rural state. And that's how folks saw her. They saw her as someone who was pushing for broadband, not as someone who is trans looking to be in a position of power.
And that's exactly how it should be, right? For any scenario, whether it's you are running for a political office, or you're just an employee at a car mechanic or whatever. Like, it's you are so much more than just your sexual identity or your gender identity. You are gifted and beautiful and have capabilities that that transcend whatever your identity is. So I love that, and I'm very glad that this is being brought up, because I think a lot of people, especially younger people, they feel as if they have to conform to their identity, or that because they are gay or trans that they can't do certain things, or that they aren't able to do certain things, because that's what the narrative has been for so long in our culture. So that's amazing. And the moment that you found out you won, how did you react, and were you surprised?
You know, I was not surprised. I guess you could say it may be my Aries energy that comes in with bold confidence. But, you know, I also know how hard we worked on this campaign and how directly we connected with our community members. And so I was not shocked by the win. But when it did come through, it was, you know, this flush that happened. I can't explain it better than that. And just having it become a reality was nothing like anything I could have expected. And also did not have much time to think about it. You know, when the polls came in, we were one of the first districts called, because we're a small but mighty city. And so at 7:40 is when we found out that I had won my election. And I think I had enough time to be able to pop a bottle of champagne, pour a glass, do a little dance, and then was immediately on with press for the rest of the evening.
Wow. Yeah. An exciting time for sure. And at that point, we didn't know the presidential election outcome. So I'm sure that was kind of looming over everyone's head while you're celebrating and while you're going through the press.
And it was, you know, something that was really heartwarming to hear was people calling, or even during interviews, being told that this was a light that was shining through in what was considered darkness. We had no idea what the future of our nation was going to look like. We've only seen a prospering of hate and discrimination during the past 4 years, and such divisiveness that puts us on opposite ends, when at the end of the day, I know that we are all fighting for the same equality, equity. And yet what is so difficult in the system that we exist in is that it pits us against one another, rather than understanding it as the systems at large that are not serving us. It is not interpersonal between us and our neighbors. It is saying to our elected officials, that you are not doing enough to support us. And it's because of this disconnect from where our communities are and what truly our needs are. Because if we were focusing on needs, we wouldn't be having this long drawn out discussion around stipends or stimulus to be able to support folks to stay home and stay safe. And instead, we are just seeing an increase in COVID deaths as well as hospitalizations. It's such a turbulent time, and I wish it wasn't this way, but I'm grateful to be in a position where I can start pushing for policy that is actually focusing on those most vulnerable, rather than using that buzz phrase as a way to get votes.
Yeah. What was your main I guess sort of platforms when you were running? What was your main focus of the campaign?
My main focus was healthcare. And I am a firm believer in Medicare for all. And knowing that here in the state of Vermont, we have tried to move to a single payer healthcare system before, but it just did not work out. And I think a big piece of that was not having a legislature that was committed to moving towards a system that actually guaranteed everyone access to healthcare and health insurance, rather than treating it as the privilege that it is right now. And so I will continue to push for a single payer healthcare system and understand that this is not necessarily something that we need to see on a statewide level, but something that we need to see on a nationwide level. Because again, when we look at the state of Vermont, we have about 20,000 people that are uninsured and even more that are underinsured. And this is in our small rural state, and we have an amazing program that has folks connected to health insurance. It's about 97% of Vermonters are connected. And so to think that this is an issue that we are facing here, I can only imagine what we're seeing in other states. And knowing that these healthcare systems work. Most developing countries or developed countries have a socialist healthcare system, and it's working and thriving.
Yeah, no, I agree completely, 100%. I mean, I was for Bernie before, during the primary. So because of his stance on healthcare, and I'm fortunate enough right now as a 25-year-old that I'm still on my parents' plan, but that ends on my birthday when I turn 26. And so, I'll be looking for something or trying to figure that out on my own. But yeah, I mean, it baffles my mind just on a personal level that like we are such a developed nation. We're such a rich nation. There's so much money that goes around, and yet we have people that can't go see the doctor, and that have conditions where they need help, and you're not going to accept them because they don't have health care. And it's ridiculous, because I think that as a nation, if we want to be the best, if we want America to be the best and the strongest, that means that the collective, all of its citizens, should be happy and healthy. And the number one way to be healthy, of course, is to have health insurance. So it's ridiculous, because we should want people to be as strong and as healthy as possible. But it's not happening thanks to our current system.
Yeah, and it's not happening because of capitalism and this focus on corporate greed. And I think that is what's most detrimental, is when we put everything in the private sector, we make every piece of our system a competition, rather than focusing on how we can build it up as a community and how we can come together and really support one another. And I think one piece is the fact that there is such distrust with our government. We don't look and see options as putting them as state sanctioned or federally sanctioned, because we don't trust that it will actually work for all of us, because we have not seen that in the past, which is why we rely on these private sectors and hoping that it will be better, when at the end of the day, as we even see here in the state of Vermont with our current all-payer system, is that the emphasis is not on reducing the costs on Vermonters. The emphasis is on how much money can be made by the entities that are controlling these systems.
Yeah, and I have a lot of Canadian friends, and they laugh at what I'm about to say. So I was talking to them, and we were talking about healthcare, and of course in Canada they do have a universal healthcare type system where everyone can be insured. And I said, yeah, in America, the argument from the right wing is that if we have that, then nobody will want to be doctors anymore. And they looked at me confused, and then they started laughing. And they're like, what? I have friends that want to be doctors. I know a bunch of doctors. Like, that doesn't make the doctors go away if you give access to healthcare to everyone. And it's funny having a lot of Canadian friends, because we like look at the differences between America and Canada, and some of the things that they hear about what happens with us, or the way things work in America, they just laugh at it. And I'm just like, yeah, you know what? I can't explain it. This is capitalism. This is what our nation is like. So,
I mean, we have been sold so many lies, especially when we think about universal health care, because I remember hearing narratives that we don't want the health care that Canadians have because there's long lines. You're not able to see your doctor. You're not getting the treatment that you want. If you need a specialist, you're thinking months out. And yet when you talk and you hear about the actual lived experience, it's that I had a cough today, so I was able to walk down to my doctor and have that checked out.
yeah.
If I had a cough today, if I had a cough that concerned me, I personally would wait at least 3 to 5 days before I contact my doctor, full well knowing that I would get 100, if not thousands of dollars worth of bills that I would have to pay for any kind of examination, treatment, etc. Versus what we see again in Canada, whereas I'm going to check preventative on this cough, find out that there may be something going on or there may be nothing going on, and not a single cent is coming out of my pocket when I am seeing a doctor same day.
Yeah, I think it's what we're hoping for, and I think we are moving in the right direction. I don't know if in this next administration if we'll get there, but I have faith that just even with the collective of how Gen Z and millennials are growing up and they're finally coming to voting ages, I think that it's getting there. I think we're going in the right direction. So hopefully by the next election we'll see some significant changes in the healthcare industry.
I think what was really reassuring, and to build on that point, is that all of the folks who were running for Congress this past year who advocated for and supported Medicare for all won their elections.
Oh, wow.
Every one of them who pushed for Medicare for all won their elections. So we see that there is the support here in this nation behind it. And what is most disappointing is that it's almost as if we have to convince those with the most amount of power that this is where we want to go, even though the evidence is clear from just about everyone, except for those corporations who continuously fund the elections.
Yes, once you realize that it's not necessarily red versus blue, but it's kind of the 99% of us versus the 1%. Everything changes. The way you start to look at almost every issue begins to change, and I think a lot of people are waking up to that. But we'll see in time where it ends up. So as a trans person in politics, what have you seen in our current administration or current legislation that is harmful to trans people? Is there anything or a few things that stick out that you go, if I could snap my fingers, we would get rid of that bill?
I think what is more disappointing is the lack of consideration for LGBTQ folks when we are making legislation and, painting with such broad strokes of who we see in our state and in our nation. And so when I think about what I would want to see, it really focuses on making sure that all of our systems are creating equitable pathways to access to services and beyond. And so I can't say that there are pinpoint bills that I would want to see changed, but more the way that we create legislation, and even building beyond trans or LGBTQ identities, also taking into consideration our Black and Indigenous people of color. And the way that I think what is most jarring for me is looking at the various reports that we receive or study committees that we put into place where we don't collect data that is focusing on demographics. And the demographics that feel most important to me are looking at our sexual and gender minorities, as well as thinking across racial and ethnic identities. And I think a perfect example of this is looking at the initial COVID response. So when we were looking at COVID, we put such a strong emphasis on age and age brackets on how we could protect folks, and put no consideration into racial or ethnic identities. And yet, once we put the effort in, once we started to look at the numbers and actually collect the data, we saw that our Black and Brown siblings had extreme rates of contracting COVID, longer hospitalizations, longer terms of dealing with the illness. But, luckily, I guess, is the fact that there were less mortality connected to it as well. But just in that initial realm, we didn't put emphasis or education out around the impacts of identity when it comes to things like COVID-19. And so that is a hope moving forward. And one of my main priorities is to have data collection so that when we make future legislation, we have all of the information to make a comprehensive bill.
Yeah, that's such an important point, and that's why I'm just so glad that people like you are winning elections, because we need a government that is inclusive. As you said earlier, it used to just be the rich white man that was making our decisions, but we need a government. We need it to look like the actual makeup of America, and that includes Black and Indigenous people. That includes trans people, gay people, anyone, immigrants, things like that. So I'm glad that people like you are winning elections, and that we're moving forward in that direction and having a more diverse legislature. And so one thing I wanted to bring up was a lot of my audience is fairly young, and so some of them come from communities or small towns where there's not a lot of access to resources or healthcare and things like that. And they're wondering how to get a binder. They're wondering how to start their hormones and things like that. And you are in Vermont, which is a rural community. So, what do you think that we can do, or that the government can do, to help make that more accessible for people from rural communities or small towns, and so that they can get the resources they need? Not even necessarily to transition or to start that process, but I guess in general. But what can we do for them?
That is such a great question. And I think, COVID has opened a lot of people's eyes to the ways that our systems have not supported everyone in our communities. You don't have to talk to vulnerable or marginalized communities about the ways that systems aren't supporting them or what was highlighted during COVID, because it's been highlighted for us the entire time. But I think one thing that really stands out to me in increasing access is making sure that our health insurance is covering and supporting telehealth and telemedicine services. And I think that is one way to broaden our outreach for especially LGBTQ youth, to be able to find a counselor online who understands their identity and can support them holistically in that process. And knowing that, especially when we think of our rural towns, the access to information and education is not as broad as it could be. And so having access to internet is first and foremost an important piece. And I hope that under this new legislation that we will see a push for, nationwide broadband and really increasing access to the internet, so that we can have telehealth, telemedicine services, and again, continue to push our insurance agencies to actually pay for telehealth and telemedicine. It is mind-blowing to think that prior to COVID, if someone needed telemedicine mental health support, they would have to pay completely out of pocket for that, and it would not have been covered. But the second that COVID hit, insurance agencies flipped and said, absolutely, we will pay for your mental health counseling online. Absolutely, we will pay for your appointments to meet with your physician virtually. And knowing that when we look at reduced barriers to accessing care, that is one way to do it. You're more likely to talk to your doctor if you're able to talk to them through your computer, rather than having to find reliable transportation to drive in. You might have to take a full day off of work to see your doctor. People just tend to delay their care instead. And then we see more detrimental impacts when it comes to health, and also a whole lot of money that we'd be spending in the long term.
Yeah, sure. And I really like what you said about the having an online therapist or a person to talk to, but also specifically being someone that can relate to that community, because I've heard stories of young people, of young queer folk who go and talk to a therapist, and the therapist tells them things like, you're too young to know, or why don't you just wait this out and figure it out later, or things like that. Like they tell them like completely terrible advice and wrong things. And the benefit of having it be online is that if you're in a small community, well, maybe you could have one therapist for like 5 or 6 counties or whatever. And so it's not like, you have less therapists technically, because everyone's online. And so it's not like they have to drive hours and hours just to see someone. And yeah, that's an interesting point. I hadn't really thought of that before you brought it up. So thank you for bringing that up. I think, of course, mental health is like one of the most important things that our society needs to work on and figure out. Of course, along with physical health, but mental health is just, especially since the pandemic, has been nosediving.
And not to mention the stigma that is attached to mental health. We've been in a society that hasn't allowed us to talk about this openly, or talk about a need for therapy and therapists, or normalizing that people in our communities are suffering from depression and anxiety at such high rates, especially among the LGBTQ community. And so I think in breaking down those barriers to be able to talk about it also allows us to see ways that we can increase access to those support services.
Yeah, absolutely. And staying kind of within that topic of LGBT youth and mental health, according to a study by the True Colors Fund, roughly 1.5 million youth are homeless in the United States, with 40% identifying as part of the LGBT community. It's also disproportionately Black and Indigenous of these homeless youth. And so, do you think that the federal government has the power or the ability to eliminate this or reduce the risk of homeless youth?
Ooh, this is such a great question, and I think one piece that comes up for me is really thinking about education. And so when I hear these statistics about LGBTQ youth and homelessness, I know that there is a direct correlation to family rejection. And family rejection is typically tied up in ignorance and not understanding and supporting one's identity. So I think taking a more local focus and thinking here in the state of Vermont, we have really gutted our mental health services here. And when we think of mental health services, that includes supporting families who may be having difficulties with their young folks, or maybe not understanding across difference. And so, do I think the federal government is able to solve this? Not necessarily, but do I think that if we improve our mental health and healthcare systems, that in turn we will see a thriving community? Absolutely, I do. And I think another piece that we need to look at is how we are funding our nonprofits, and understanding that I know here in Vermont, we have a wealth of resources, whether that's Pride Center of Vermont that works with LGBTQ adults, or whether we think of Outright Vermont, which is specifically working with LGBTQ youth and families and making safer environments across the state for those folks to be able to thrive.
Yeah, 100%. And you work at the Pride Center of Vermont, right? Or you did.
I do.
What exactly? What did it look like there? Like, what was the mission of the center, and what type of resources did they provide?
So the mission of the center was to support any and everyone in the LGBTQ community. And it came in a variety of ways. So my program specifically, in working on health and wellness, was truly focused on getting folks connected to safe and affirming healthcare providers in the state, as well as doing education with those healthcare providers to make sure that they are giving the best care possible. as well as doing interventions on the community level. So we know that there are elevated risk for HIV among gay and bisexual men. And so we had a full program that focused on sexual health education and promoting HIV testing and STI testing in the community. We also have an amazing safe space program, which works with LGBTQ survivors of violence and thinking of violence in the broadest of terms. And these advocates work in not only providing emotional support to those survivors, but also being advocates within systems that, again, are not well-versed in LGBTQ identities, more specifically. And so having someone who knows how to navigate these tricky systems and knows how to persevere through that is just such a gift, because it is exhausting as a marginalized person to consistently have to fight for yourself. Consistently fight. And it's an unreasonable expectation, because these support services are supposed to be exactly that, supportive, not a burden to add on.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's amazing that when you see organizations like that, like the Pride Center of Vermont or like the Trevor Project, I mean, they're so important. And we always link in our show notes the number in the website to the Trevor Project, because we know that people might be listening and going through stuff and that they need someone to talk to or they need some help. And I think that you were saying earlier how education is the way out, or the way of eliminating the homeless youth, the people who are getting kicked out of their houses. And I agree 100%. I think that we need to start adding LGBT history in school, or at least be talking about it or referencing it. And in health class, we need to be talking about sexual safety and sexual health as it pertains to people who might like guy on guy, girl on girl, and things like that. Do you know if there's anything like that happening in Vermont, that where they are pushing for an LGBT agenda in schools?
Absolutely. I know that there is currently a task force that is focusing on our sexual health education and making that as inclusive as possible within our school systems. As well as, I know the legislature in previous bienniums passed a racial and ethnic studies committee that would look into creating curriculum in the K through 12 school system around racial and ethnic identities, and understanding that what we are currently taught is a whitewashed version of our history. Mm-hmm. It starts when colonialism happened and colonization here in the United States, when we understand that this land is the unceded territory of many indigenous and native cultures here in the United States. And so I think there is a beauty in making sure that we are truly learning a history that isn't just focused on one point of view, and also making sure that, goodness, it's wild to think that there's such control over what we are able to learn here in this nation. Yet I know the youth are going beyond because of things like the internet. This is such an amazing tool to allow folks to learn a plethora of information, and especially being able to find community. And so I think our youth are so resourceful. This new generation, I swear, knows more about our identities and the ways that our systems are not supporting us than I will ever have the opportunity to know.
I agree 100%. I mean, I'm on TikTok. That's where I get most of my listeners and things like that. And the kids on TikTok are just like so special. Like, they know so much. My comment section educates me sometimes. Like, it's insane. And I'm just so proud and happy to be involved with that and to be seeing these people. And I've made connections with, like, I know my biggest supporters, like they're 13-year-old girls or 15-year-olds or whatever. And like, I feel like I have this connection with them because they're my biggest supporters, and they'll message me and stuff. And they're like, they talk about how much the community has helped them. And our Discord server, rest in peace, it had to get deleted. But like, and just seeing that and seeing how you can build a community and inspire so many people with just a phone is insane. And I think that without the internet, we would know less about each other and we would kind of be living in ignorance. But we wouldn't have that level of comfortability that we're attaining now, because we can talk to each other and we can learn from each other, which is just awesome. And of course, there's a plethora of downsides of the internet, but that's kind of a discussion for another time. But yeah, the internet, that just TikTok and Gen Z, it's amazing how I don't want to say the word, but like woke they are in terms of society and like in our history. I mean, Columbus. It's so funny, when I was like 20 years old when I realized or learned that Columbus never even set foot in North America. Like, he landed in the Caribbean. Like, that was not North America. Why do we have statues of him here? So, yeah.
Why do I know that he sailed the ocean blue in 1492? Like, that's now stuck in my head for eternity.
Yeah, what was the point of that? Yeah, well, so let's kind of talk about the events that unfolded January 6th. As an elected official, you obviously watched what happened at the Capitol. There's an attempted insurrection or attempted coup, however you want to look at it. What were you thinking as these events were unfolding? What was going through your head?
I mean, it was that was a whirlwind of a day, because I spent my morning being sworn in, and really declaring myself as being here in the legislature, and really feeling that joy and understanding the importance of such a declaration. And then to leave that space virtually to see what was happening in the Capitol, made me fear for the future of democracy, and understanding the authoritarianism that we have supported and condoned for the past 4 years. And I think the imagery that has really stuck with me from that event was watching people rip down the American flags and replace them with Trump flags, or to fly the Confederate flag through the halls of the Capitol. And I think those are both stark reminders of fascism, and how it is alive and well, and these white supremacist ideals are still very much ingrained within these systems. But it also is not shocking, because we have this political system where white supremacy is baked into the foundation of our capital and of our governmental structure. And so, could I say that I was shocked by those actions? No. What I can say is that there are so many Americans who are being sold a lie. And we know that. And a majority of us know that there are blatant lies that are being told by our current president, that are just being pushed through other social media channels, and are so destructive to this thought of free speech. And I think what is most difficult is that all of us are hoping for the same thing. All of us want to be paid a livable wage. All of us want to be able to access healthcare with ease. All of us want to be able to own homes and property and live in a thriving economy. And yet we're in a system where we're pitted against one another, where we understand that it is our neighbor who is, the person that we are fighting, rather than these larger corporations. As we said earlier, why are we not turning to a central enemy, which is, the rich who are hoarding a wealth within this nation, rather than turning to one another and blaming each other for these systems that we had nothing to do with?
Yeah.
And I think that is what's most difficult, especially as we hear future plans for insurrection here in our nation. I know we are on high alert here in Vermont about a potential rally this weekend that will be happening at our Capitol, or even knowing that the same rally will be happening in DC.
Yeah, wow. Well, I did hear that the same group that showed up on January 6th, or the Trump loyalists, if you want to call them that they have been talking of plans of or close to the Biden inauguration, to protest once again at the Capitol, and protest at the Capitol of every 50 states, which, you can't live in fear, you can't live in worry, but it just alarms me, because what is their end goal? I mean, their end goal is to keep Trump in power. Their end goal is to destroy our democracy. And that's of course not, that's not what we want. That's what no one wants besides these people. And that's the most blatantly un-American thing to do, is to protest a fair and free election and keep your dictator in power.
And yet the cognitive dissonance that is present in understanding that these people believe that they are fighting for democracy. They believe that there was an election taken from them, which is, an interesting phrase, essentially, because none of them were running for office. There was one man running for office, and he lost through a free election. And it's hard because when we're coming up against lies, where do we put the burden of proof? And typically we would look to our media sources as the ones who provide us that detail. And yet now there's no trust in our media. And so again, how do we talk across difference when the difference is truth versus lies? I don't have an answer to this. Trust me, I wish that I did. I wish that I could, cure this divide that we have. And yet it always makes me wonder, when are we going to unify? And this is not me saying that I want us to unify with folks who believe in white supremacy and anti-Semitism. This is me saying, when are we able to unify with folks who truly believe in democracy and are being taught that democracy lies with Trump and does not lie within us, the people who have the power?
Yeah, and I think the distrust in media, it once again comes back to the greed and the hoarding of the 1%, because the powerful companies that control the media, they need two narratives. They need a Fox News and a CNN. They need viewers, and they need people to be angry, and because that gets clicks and that gets likes and that gets shares if you're outraged. And it's the same thing with social media, with the algorithms, where you go on Twitter, and if you only like tweets from leftists or liberals, you're only going to see that. And if you like tweets from the right wing, you're only going to see right wing stuff, because that's how the algorithms work. And so you get in this rabbit hole of just seeing what you want to believe or seeing what you want to see. And that's where the cognitive dissonance sets in. You are completely out of touch with the reality and the other side, when really we should be working together and at least having conversations with each other, so that we aren't divided like we are right now at an unprecedented time. I mean, it's insane, and I think it does fall back on the greed of the 1%, because they created these algorithms and they created these media companies to do just that, to maximize viewership and profits, and the only way to do that is through outrage.
You are so right. And I think there is another piece that comes into it that, folks are not excited to hear by any means, but there's a lot of work for us as white people in taking down and tearing down these tenets of white supremacy. And the unpopular piece is that we need to stop canceling one another. We need to embrace, especially our family members who are racist, who have blatant white supremacy, who are supporting Trump. And we need to be engaging in that dialogue, because it is this Orwellian nightmare that we would push away one another because of difference in political views, rather than continuing to engage in that discussion. Pushing one another away is only going to create polar opposites, and that is only going to feed into this system that is pitting us against one another. Rather than, yes, it is hard. It is absolutely uncomfortable being in those spaces, but we have been comfortable enough for 400 years and not having this discussion. It is time for us to step up. It is time for us to stop posting those statuses saying, if you voted for Trump, unfriend me, and instead saying, if you voted for Trump, have a conversation with me.
Wow, I love that. That was really good. I agree. I mean, it's hard. It's definitely hard. I mean, I even live in a family where, I am the minority, being a fairly leaning person, and it's draining sometimes. When you're at the family dinner table, it's like I wanna fight. I wanna be there, but it's like it's so hard and it's draining, and it's like almost they're never going to convince each other. It's like you have to, I don't know where it comes from, like they have to realize it on their own. You can't convince them, but like you have to at least try, because hopefully one day they will wake up and they will realize, oh, you have made some points, you are correct. But it's very hard, and I'm glad you brought that up, because it's so true. If you're a Trump supporter, no, you should follow me. You should listen to my podcast. Maybe you should come on my podcast. I remember back in the summer when there was a whole bunch, the Black Lives Matter movement was happening. I had a Black TikTok creator come on, and we talked, and he was, of course, on the side of BLM. And then the very next week, I talked to a Hispanic cop, someone of fairly the opposite end. And I think just those kinds of dialogues where you can open it up and see both sides and at least be cordial with each other are so important. So I'm glad that you brought that point up.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's this piece where, of course, if you're holding a marginalized identity and you are experiencing direct harm from the conversations that are happening, I'm not asking for you to stand in there. I am not asking for our Black and Indigenous siblings to be stepping in and having these conversations with racist white folks. That is an unsafe situation.
Right.
But what I am saying is that for white people, we need to stop distancing ourselves from other white people. There are not good whites and bad whites. We are all white together. We are all benefiting from this system. And when we, again, push folks away and say, I'm not engaging in this discussion, you are wrong and I am right, does not allow for any change to happen.
Right. And then what happens is that you push them away, and then they go on their Reddit or their 4chan or whatever, and they get more radicalized because that's where their community is, where they think their community is. And it's just this never-ending cycle of radicalization, with no help, of course, from the media or the algorithms. But it's such an interesting time. I'm really curious in the next 4 years what's going to happen with big tech and with things like Facebook and stuff, because we're already seeing some change. I mean, Trump was removed from every single platform, but like, if this divide continues, regardless of whether Trump's on the platform or not, and we see more radicalization, like, does the government, do you think that, in your opinion, does the government have the ability, not the ability, but the bounds to step in? Is that something that the government should handle, is stepping into these big tech companies and doing something about their way of operating?
I think there are some big pieces to consider. Yes, I think that government can step in, especially when we think of the algorithms and AI, and the way that AI itself can be programmed by people to be biased and prejudiced. And so there does have to be some examination. But I think the larger question at hand is, will we have a government that is separate from corporate greed? And so right now we talk about living in a democracy, when in actuality it is an oligarchy. And so when I hope for change with this transition of Biden and Kamala Harris moving into the positions of president and vice president, do I hope for that change? Yes. And do I think we will move into a safer time to be able to protest and stand up against the inequities? Yes. But am I expecting this major change? No, because the people with the money and the 1% are still dictating the information that we are intaking from news and media, and exactly what policies are going to be able to push through. Because if you do not follow the lead of the people who are giving you the money, they will not fund your future election, which is why it is so important to make sure that we move into a future where we have publicly financed elections, where it is the people who decide where the money goes, and that corporations have no influence into how our elected officials are moving into positions of power.
Yeah, I agree. And I have an interesting question. What did you think of Andrew Yang when he ran for president? Because he had all these out of box ideas that like were so random. Like he had like this idea for democracy dollars, where everybody gets a certain amount to like donate to whichever political figure they'd like all these crazy kind of cool stuff. It's like, what are your thoughts on him?
Oh, I love those campaign finance dollars. I think it is an amazing way to again, give the power to the people and being able to use their tax money to say who they want their elected official to be. Because right now we're asking folks to not only pay into taxes, but then on top of that, contribute to political candidates that they would like to see move forward. And I think another more radical idea but one that I wholeheartedly support and hope we move into as a nation is ranked choice voting. And so ranked choice voting allows us to move away from this binary of Republican and Democrat and truly allow third-party candidates to have an ability to win elections, because the way it would work is instead of placing a single vote, you would rank all of the candidates from 1 to however many candidates there are. And if your number one candidate is not in the top 2 vote getters, then your vote would then move to your second. And then if that person is also not, then it would move to your third. And therefore, every vote counts. Every single vote would truly count, rather than what we hear now of the narrative of voting for third-party candidates is you are throwing away your vote because you are not buying into this binary model of democracy.
Yeah, and it really would help break up the two-party system, which is, in my opinion, is so important to do. Because I think when you actually talk to people, your average American, you realize that they're not very far on the right or very far on the left. They're always somewhere in the middle. And you know, and of course with the media and with everything, it's so polarized. You know, we have red and blue, and it's like you're either a communist or you're a fascist. When, you know, we're Americans, we're in the middle. We have different views on some things, but we all want the same things, as we've repeatedly said. And I think that getting rid of the two-party system is probably maybe the most important thing to preserve our democracy, so we don't continue to be so divisive. Where do you think the Republican Party goes from here? I mean, with Trump gone, what happens in 2024 with the Republican Party?
I wish I knew. I know that we are reckoning with that same question here with the Vermont Republican Party, and showing that there are some folks who are still very much in support of Trump's actions and others who are not. And so it begs to answer, how do we move forward from this? And I don't know, but it is one of the various reasons why I'm running and did run as a progressive Democrat. I'm really proud to be in a state that honors our third party and gives a voice and an ability to really move outside of just this binary thinking.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And Trump was impeached just 2 hours from this recording. What exactly does that mean? What happens now that he's been impeached a second time?
And impeached by the House, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Well, it means exactly what it did last time, which is nothing.
Oh, no.
It passed by the Senate as well before it can take any impact on Trump. And so my hope is that we will see this pass through the Senate and that he will be unable to run for office again. I am hoping that Congress is committed to these actions, because I do fear for 2024 if Trump is not impeached, because I do foresee him running again and this divide only being strengthened.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. Yeah, well, hopefully the Senate can pass it and he can be just completely locked out. I think that, do you think there's possibility that he'll face jail time for his actions as president? Are you allowed to say?
Am I allowed to say? Absolutely. Do I think it will actually happen? No. Do I wish it would happen? Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of us do. in a justice for all, right? Isn't that part of the Pledge of Allegiance?
It is. It is. But, you know, justice, as we know, is not equally applied here in our nation.
No, not at all. Not if you are white and wealthy, then you can get away with almost anything. Just just ask
Truth.
any of the criminals that Trump has done business with, or even non-Trump people. Like, I mean, I saw this TikTok that was like, if you're rich, it just means that you can buy your way out of anything. You get a parking ticket, it's $100 to park there. That's how you look at it. It's not even like, oh, I have to pay. It's like, I just have to pay $100 to park in this illegal spot, and I can buy my way out. And that's an interesting thing. Have you thought about like fees and fines and law enforcement fines being scaled to your income? Because I saw something where that's like an idea. It might be tossed around in I forget what country, but like if you make $100,000, your fine would be $10. If you make $1 million, your fine's 100. Like it's scaled to your income. Is that something that you thought of or that you're aware of?
Ooh, I am in more of the wheelhouse of reimagining our criminal justice and law enforcement systems, and thinking about the way that we criminalize poverty as it is. And exactly what you said there. Who are the fines impacting? The fines are impacting those who do not have the finances to be able to afford them. And even with increased fines would not impact those who have the money to be able to pay for them. So, yeah, my goal is in the long term there as to how can we change our systems to really be community focused and addressing the harm at the base rather than continuing to replicate these cycles of oppression and harm in our communities.
Yeah. As in some closing, what do you have any advice that you would give to queer youth seeking to enter politics?
For queer youth who are hoping to enter politics, I would encourage you to get involved in campaigns that you believe in your local city, town, state. If there is a candidate that excites you, especially if there is an LGBTQ candidate running, help with canvassing. Ask what volunteer work they need. It is a great step and a foot in the door, and not only understanding the political process, but also being able to learn what it is really like in moving into this political realm. And also, if you think that you should do it, then do it. Your voice is needed, whether it is on your school board or state rep or governor or even president. We would love to see you thrive in any of those positions, and reach out to me if you have any further questions.
And where can people find you?
You can go to my website. It is taylorsmallvt.com.
Perfect. Do you want to shout out your social medias or?
Oh, I mean, it's Taylor Small VT everywhere. I try to make it as easy as possible to find me.
Perfect. Well, Representative Taylor Small, this was awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Congratulations on your win. I had a great time tonight.
Yes, thank you as well. And I hope I can come back again when we talk about future wins.
Yes, absolutely. There's always a spot for you here.
Awesome. Thank you.
Have a great night.
You as well. Bye.
Bye.